Onward and Upward. Joining us, my fave, co-host of Fox and Friends, Mr. Brian Kilmeade, author of The President and the Freedom Fighter. And that's an important book to talk about today, which is why we're thrilled you could come on set, because you wrote a great book, which, as you know, I read.
Thank you.
Every page.
Appreciate it.
But Lincoln and Frederick Douglass had these debates, disagreements, men of their times, long time ago, 1860s, whatnot, 1850s, 1860s, then the 1870s and so forth. So judging from your research in your book, which was a bestseller, what do you make of this debate? It's the Martin Luther King versus the woke CRT people on the one hand, but it goes way back to the Abe Lincoln debates, I think.
And the question is, too, would Martin Luther King be canceled today? Because he was for a colorblind society. Frederick Douglass for a colorblind society. In fact, he's quoted in probably his 40s of saying the more he thought about it growing up, kids don't see color. And he talked about all the white kids he was friendly with growing up, yet he was born into slavery. I mean, he had to escape for freedom. And he said the kids don't see color, and that's why I thought the CRT was so damaging. And then you have Martin Luther King Jr. in speech after speech and interview after interview, living in a segregated America at the time where you had to fight to sit at a lunch counter or sit in the front of a bus or to use a certain bathroom or a water fountain, saying, hey, our goal is equality. For we just look at each other and say, hey, I'd like to hang out with you or I don't. Not like, are you black, are you white, what's your heritage? And now there's such a sense of you owe me in America, and I just think that it's so counterintuitive and counterproductive for the forward thinking of this country.
You owe me. You know what? I think it's even worse than you owe me, because what some of these crazy woke leftists are really saying is you are to blame. In other words, you got kids in a classroom, okay? You and I long past classrooms, but kids are in a classroom. And these woke people, and unfortunately a lot of them are teachers, I hate to say this, and they're actually saying to white kids, you're the problem. The color of your white skin is the problem. Now, Brian, I've always felt not only is that just utter garbage, but who is hurt the most? I say it's the black who's being made into a victim. A young black kid is taught not to read, write, innovate, work hard, be clever, mix and be social, but to hate white people. Well, how's that figure?
I think this
How can that be good?
I think it's a great point. I am not saying I'm qualified to be a curator at a civil rights museum. I'm not saying that, but I've had a chance to really study Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, and dive into Martin Luther King. And I had a chance to host a radio show with Jim Brown, who is an activist football player.
I didn't know that.
And we're still great friends today.
Whoa.
So we would sit there on an all-sports radio show, and we would always talk about race. And he'd go do this thing, go into prisons and talk to people. And I watched him over and over again. Don't use excuses to tell your circumstances. Fight for equality, but go to make the most of who you are and what you can be. Don't limit yourself to what your accomplishments are. And I would say this. I watched that deranged lunatic who killed that 19-year-old Burger King worker. Do you know what he was screaming when he was hauled out of that room? I want reparations. He was a Jamaican citizen. He wants reparations. And I'm saying to myself, where'd that come from? I'm not saying I can get into that lunatic's head. But there's a sense of anger and entitlement that I think we're putting into people's heads. It's not America first. It is what color am I and what do you owe me? And I think when you see Donald Trump with the Republican Party starting creeping up with the black vote, and when you see the same thing happening with the Hispanic vote, it's not working. Telling people they're victims is not working because, thankfully, in a lot of cases, especially Hispanic households, they're getting pushback from their families who are saying, don't give me excuses. This is the best country in the world. Keep fighting through it. And I think we're seeing that over and over again. And I think what I think is such a step backwards is that speech last week by President Biden.
Yes, it's most regrettable.
And they're still doing it. They're still debating about. I watched James Clyburn over the weekend start saying that this is basically 1960 or 1870.
Which is just a flat-out, bald-faced lie. Clyburn's not a dumb guy. He knows better. Schumer's not a dumb guy. I don't agree with those guys. I don't agree with Biden. But they're not dumb people. They're just not citing the facts. There are factual facts here. And that's why I did admire today's New York Post editorial, which cited the good. Now, as I said, 2 years ago when I was in government and all the riots broke out in the summer of 2020, everyone was talking about systemic racism. And they were coming after me. I mean, I don't know why particularly. It was just coming after me. It came after everybody in the Republican Party or in the Trump administration. But I would say, okay, how is it that just a few years ago, an African American was twice elected president with 80 million white votes? Now, that 80 million white vote number is a number that has been verified up and down by any number of pollsters and so on. 80 million white votes. How is that a country of white supremacy which has not come anywhere either since the 1860s or the 1960s? How is that possible? Explain that to me.
And then you're the first.
No one ever had an answer. They would move on to something else.
Well, because people don't really care. They saw a guy who's in his 40s, who's extremely good speaker, who was extremely confident. The people liked his life story. Remember, before he was even a U.S. As he became a U.S. Senator, he wrote a best-selling biography about what he went through, walking through the tundra to these churches, quitting a high-priced law firm with a big salary in order to be a community activist. And I never put that down. I said to myself, people wanted to like him. John McCain wanted to like him. John McCain cited the fact that in one of his speech when he said, okay, I know I lost. And he talked about Booker T. Washington being invited to Teddy Roosevelt's house, to the White House with his whole family. And he said, and I'll just paraphrase, he said there was a big controversy when Teddy Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington at his house to the White House. And he said, how could you invite a black person to the White House and eat with your family? And now you're going to be hosting that meal. You're going to be at the White House. That's going to be your home. That's progress.
And the other points made today by the Post, by others too, I saw in the Washington Examiner, but it's stuff. Look, I was mentored in my early political years working for Reagan by the late, great Jack Kemp. And they used to say, you know, Jack Kemp was a, quote, civil rights Republican, okay, and would try to bend his party. Now, the odd thing is, Republicans in the 60s were the ones that got the civil rights laws passed, not the Democratic segregationists. Then Republicans kind of slowed down. Kemp was very strong about this. People say, well, he's the only guy who ever showered with an African American because he was an athlete and he was head of the Football Players Union and so forth. We were civil rights Republicans, okay? So, to me, civility, calmness, and good ideas. Good ideas not only about elections, Brian, but good ideas about finance, wealth, owning your businesses, and economic success. We have had a lot of economic success, and the Democratic Party today, or at least some of them, are trying to make it out that we've had no election success, no civil rights success, and no economic success. It's just flat out factual lies.
And we see that in Georgia in the election. And I would say this, it just reminds me of Jim Brown said to me, there was a big story, one story after another, about we need a black general manager, a black coach. And he used to say to me, no, black owner. He goes, you have to own. You have to be an owner. Be owner, and then you dictate the rules. You don't have to wait to be hired. Take control. And now the money is so great with all these players, they can instantly become owners. We're seeing with Derek Jeter. We're seeing with Michael Jordan. We're certainly going to see with LeBron James. This is just high profile. The people that you know that are actually the fuel of the economy, the Wall Street people who are buying and taking great risks, and the entrepreneurs and the hedge fund owners, there's a lot of diversity there, and there's a lot of imagination there. They just don't have the fame.
Okay. But the successes are coming. The numbers are showing. The ownership is gathering. Here's what, as much as there's so many things that annoy me about this left-wing CRT stuff, and we're all white supremacists if we don't agree with them. But the fact of the matter is are wrong. They are wrong. And
you mean about the individual laws in these states, what they're saying about Texas and Georgia? It's a flat-out lie.
Almost everything they say, almost every assertion they make is factually wrong. Whether it's election laws, that's just a small piece of it. Whether it's financial improvement, jobs improvement, unemployment improvement, even stuff like opportunity zones. You know, Senator Tim Scott talks a lot about opportunity. That, by the way, was originally a Jack Kemp idea. I don't know how many years ago. It's now working. What did I say? 25, 30 billion in new capital has gone into these underserved areas. That is progress, Brian Kilmeade. That is progress.
Incentivize banks.
Don't tell me there's no progress.
Incentivize banks and financial institutions to invest in economic stressed areas. You bring them in with money, but they don't outbuild their income of the people in the area. So that's what Tim Scott was doing. But I always said to myself, why weren't the Trump people talking more about that? I would write to Senator all the time. Should have.
I want him to now.
And
I want him
Republicans
to
got to
now.
start fighting for these mayor seats.
I agree.
And
Oh,
don't give
I like
up on
that.
the urban vote like they did in Georgia.
I'm in there pitching. There's only so much time in a day.
I know.
I'm exhausted.
I know. You're talking to the president, Joe Manchin. Your phone's always burning up.
Brian Kilmeade on set. It's wonderful to have you on set.
Great to
and
see you.
folks, if you have not read the book, please read the book. It is a terrific book, and it goes right to the issues we have today. And it was for quite some time on the bestseller list.
This last week was the first week off. I think it's going to pop back on.
All right, we're going to, every night this week, I'm going to mention we're going to pop it back on. Maybe
Right.
it gets back on radio. Brian Kilmeade, Fox and Friends, thanks very